media, and it was thought that looking at the volume of placement of articles about Title IX could allow for discerning to what extent female journalists have been given opportunities to present stories on and advocate for this important equality legislation. And the big question is, if given the opportunity to advocate for women's advancement in the context of Title IX, do female journalists either succumb to social control or embrace a feminist disposition? And to succumb to social control would say that they would want to sort of fit in other words, sort of report like a man. And to advocate for a feminist disposition, of course, would be to advocate for Title IX. Now, past research on general news reporting has looked at differences in quality, in quantity, style, and substance by journalist gender, and it's generally been negative for female journalists. Some have looked at general news coverage to find that male bylines outnumber female bylines, which to some extent makes sense because of the numbers of males and females in the business too. Some studies have shown that there are only 30-some% of journalists who are female. In sports media, it's maybe 11%. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But in general, female journalists use fewer stereotypes. They write more positive stories than their male counterparts do. Journalists have often been assigned to or chosen to write about what might be called women's topics, such as fashion, on the wives of public officials, or on dating and different things like this. And studies have found all of these. In the field of political reporting, things are similar. And political reporting, I think, is important because politics and sports have certain things in common. And that is that both have sides, both have competition, both have an event in which a winner is ultimately chosen, and so on. And it's been found that female reporters, when reporting favorably on female candidates, structure their stories to really favor the female candidate. And female reporters typically give more prominence to female candidates. And female reporters covered, for example, presidential candidate Elizabeth Dole actually more critically in terms of what she wore and her appearance and her lack of substance, or on her husband, while male reporters generally focused on her financial viability as a candidate. Now, on the topic of sports media coverage, some have said that that the fact that there is less coverage of women is not unconnected to the fact that there are imbalances in the newsroom, and that makes some sense. And as Nicole was saying, I did do a study before with a student from School of Kinesiology where we looked at the sheer volume and prominence of articles about women in sports, so not even about Title IX, but just women in sports. We looked at the front pages of the sports sections of the Star Tribune and Pioneer Press from, not quite back to the 1840s, but from 1940, and I think Sid Hartman was in there, by the way, from 1940 to basically the present. And what we found is that there was actually fewer articles, a smaller percentage of articles about women's sports on the front pages of the sports sections post-Title IX than there were pre-Title IX. In fact, back in the 1940s, you could find all kinds of stories about women on the front pages of the sports sections. And they were featured more prominently, which is above the fold rather than buried. And there were a lot of stories, too, about women in sort of non-traditional sports like hunting and fishing and rock climbing, things like this. And today, if you look at the outdoor section, the front page, you hardly ever see a woman on the front. So those are some of the context of what we've had for reporting on women's sports.